Jason, let me give you a quick introduction here, if I might. Um, Jason Downing, Dr. Jason Downing is originally from Kansas City. He completed his BS in biology at the University of Kansas. After graduation, he relocated to Miami and attended the University of Miami and worked as the curator for the Gifford Arboretum and started his graduate studies. He completed his MS in environmental science and a PhD in biology at Florida International University in 2016. During his graduate tenure, he held positions at Fairchild Garden and Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, working on research related to orchid ecology and mycorrhizal. Is that mycorrhizal genetics or
Yep.
mycorrhizal Okay, genetics and conservation.
Yep.
Dr. Downing has also been working in orchid conservation in Florida, China, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean for over 10 years. He is currently the director of research at Fairchild Garden, where he focuses on orchid research, propagation, education, and conservation. Most notably, the internationally recognized citizen science program, the Million Orchid Project, which we'll be looking at tonight, is now the largest public outreach program focused on orchids in the world. This orchid research, with over 40,000 K-12 and undergraduate students, has led to over 600,000 native orchids being replanted into the public landscapes of South Florida. The conservation and research has been published in peer-reviewed journals and publicized through various media outlets, most notably NPR, National Geographic, In Defense of Plants podcasts, and numerous local and national news outlets. Jason, we're so pleased to have you. I think I got inspired by the presentation you did to the, I guess the native plants, or sorry, what's the native plant society. It was
Hmm.
maybe, in Florida, I heard the presentation. So great to hear this work. And I wanted to make sure that we had a chance in FCAN to hear you present about that and some of the fantastic citizen science work you're doing, especially with students. So welcome and thank you very much. I'm going to put myself on mute here and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Scott, and everyone else who's joined us tonight. Happy to be speaking with a whole new group of folks, and some of you may have already heard of the program, so maybe a little bit of hopefully some new updates and kind of new directions. But it's just great to introduce new people to the program and how we need to think about conservation in a very non-traditional way, and that's really how I've kind of framed this program as it's developed over the last 12 years now, as kind of this modern twist on conservation where rather than focusing on these protected areas where I spend most of my time as a conservation biologist, so deep in the woods or the jungle somewhere in this protected areas with a small team of scientists, protected by buffer zones and all that. This is kind of looking at conservation that occurs in public landscapes, in places where people live, work, learn, and play. In addition to that, the idea of rather than working with small teams of scientists, we can really scale up our conservation capacity when we involve the entire community. Kind of what crowdsourcing the science, for lack of a better term, or maybe a more modern term. So the idea is to get everyone involved in the entire conservation process, as you'll see, from young students as young as kindergarten, even younger, all the way to postdocs and local people in your community that are just plant enthusiasts, and even introducing new people to the understanding the importance of conservation and really using these iconic plants as orchids as kind of our gateway into capturing their attention into things such as climate, as we'll talk a bit about today, all the way to biodiversity. So with that said, I'll try to roll through these slides. I got quite a few, but it's mostly pictures, and we'll tell you a little bit about the program, but also the new directions and how we're already thinking about the impacts of warming trend, aka climate change, and the impacts of how they're going to have and how these impacts are going to play their way out in plants in the future. So with that said, let me see if I can. Oh, looks like I have to use my mouse. So really quick shameless plug for those that aren't familiar with Fairchild Garden. We're an 83-acre botanic garden at Coral Gables near Matheson Hammock. We're the major metropolitan botanic garden for South Florida. Historically, we're opened our gates in around 1943-ish. And historically, we're very well known for our fruiting tree collection. David Fairchild was a plant explorer and brought things like the mango and soybean to the New World, which kind of changed our agriculture. But also, we were really well known for our palm collection. We have one of the largest palm collections in the world in terms of number of accessions and diversity. So if you've worked with palms, you always end up at Fairchild at some point. But we never were so much into orchids until really the enthusiasm of the Million Orchid Project. I mean, I can't tell how many times people are like, yeah, you're putting orchids in downtown Miami and in Lincoln Road and Miracle Mile, but where are the orchids at Fairchild? So as a response to that, we were able to basically create the National Orchid Garden at Fairchild about 6 years ago, where we are now very much like the Million Orchid Project. We are basically blanketing Fairchild with orchids, and just like the Million Orchid is a kind of a natural experiment, this is too, and where we're permanently attaching the majority of our collection. We're talking nearly 35,000, 40,000 orchids are permanently attached or growing in the landscape, as you can see the Sobralia here from Central America. So, that's very different than a traditional botanic garden where, you go to the garden, the orchid is blooms in the greenhouse somewhere. It appears in the collection while it's in flower, and then it disappears quickly after it's done blooming back into the greenhouse. We're trying to permanently establish our orchids in what I dub a semi-natural context. So growing the trees. So we have things like Paphiopedilums from Asia growing in the ground, Bulbophyllums from Asia growing in trees, Sobralias in the ground. So pushing the limits of what we can get away with in landscapes, and then passing that knowledge on to people. So when you visit the National Orchid Garden, you're going to see, over 400 species or varieties in the collection at any given time. Nothing, Mother Nature runs its course, so they're not all in bloom at once. But there's always something different in bloom when you come and visit. And in our laboratories, you'll see we have well over 100,000 orchids at any given time in propagation in the laboratory. And this is kind of some just beautiful photos of some of the displays, all designed by our amazing volunteers, much like the Million Orchid Project itself. The citizens and volunteers help us, reimagine our landscapes inside Fairchild and help us with building displays, curating the collection, finding innovative ways to establish orchids, and then also maintaining them. Really something we're interested in, drawing a lot of attention and making us very unique is our focus recently on Caribbean orchids, which you'll see will play a prominent role now in the Million Orchid Project. So, we have flowering ghost orchids, one of the few botanic gardens that have those in our collection, as well as really a comprehensive collection of Caribbean species. Things in particularly we're focused on from Cuba, which are nearly impossible to obtain here due to all the political situations and road barriers to that type of work. But we're really focused on kind of having this amazing exhibition of Caribbean orchids, which again can establish much like a native orchid here and don't require the long-term maintenance and can kind of handle our seasonalities in South Florida. But the Million Orchid Project itself kind of started on the other side of the planet, and we always have to pay homage to Singapore and the National Orchid Garden. So I've had the honor of working in Singapore for many years now, and kind of being behind the scenes and understanding how they've built this amazing world-class, largest collection of orchids in the world. And we really went there on one of our trips when we were going to build our orchid laboratory at Fairchild. So this is an in vitro laboratory, which I'll show you a few more photos of, where orchids grow in sterile flasks. And this is kind of the typical look of an orchid lab or culture room, where you have hundreds, if not thousands, of little baby plantlets all growing in these little flasks or glass bottles or containers, whichever you use. And immediately we were like, wow, this is super charismatic. It's sexy. It combines the science with, plants and all of this high tech kind of, appeal. But my fundamental questions was, what the heck do you do with all these orchids? This is well beyond the number of orchids. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of plants. This is well beyond the needs of a botanic garden or even a commercial enterprise running through the botanic garden. And to our surprise, they were actually handing these orchids off to their public works officials, the national parks who run the Singapore landscapes. And they were planting them in the trees as an experiment. These were rare native orchids that some were going into the natural area, but the remaining orchids were being planted out in the landscape. And when we were much younger, some of my colleagues here, when we were much younger, I had a chance to go out and watch them do this work. And to our surprise, these orchids fared quite well. This is the only data I'll bore you with for the most part. But you'll see on this Holland Road site, kind of in the middle, survivorship was even higher than some of the natural areas. So they're really onto something. And, there was a lot of speculation on why that happened, whether it was CO2 from the buses or the ambient humidity coming off the streets. But it worked. And that really got us thinking, why not Miami? And, this is kind of some of the scenes in Singapore you'll see now. Bulbophyllums just lining the trees. Grammatophyllum speciosa, the world's largest orchid, the tiger orchid or the queen of all orchids, just growing along the road, no big deal. We had ours flowered this year. And it was quite a show. It had a tremendous flowering, but you'll find a handful of these things growing in North America. But in Singapore, it's not a big deal. They're just everywhere along the road, and it was quite inspiring. So we thought, again, why not bring this model to Miami? We have our beautiful, subtropical climate, but also we're home to a lot of orchid diversity. Actually, disproportionate orchid diversity compared to the rest of the U.S. So a little bit, about kind of the orchid diversity. You're looking at about 200 to 205 species in North America. This is continental U.S., Hawaii, Alaska, and Canada. Now you add Mexico in, it jumps up by 1,200 species. But for the most part, we're only looking at about 205 species. Roughly half of those are in Florida, and over a quarter are right in our backyard in South Florida. And this is really due to the climate. This mixture of temperate, this ecotone, this region where the temperate meets the tropics. We're a subtropical climate. Technically, we were. Now we're tropical. We'll talk about that. But really, this blend of temperate and tropical species makes South Florida an orchid hotspot, we've dubbed. And really just a tremendous place to work with these plants, and unlike anywhere else in the U.S. Just to put that into perspective, we're looking at about 52 genera. For those that don't know, orchids are the largest plant family. Arguably, the second largest is Asteraceae, the sunflower family. Now from Kansas, so I should say sunflowers, but I'm biased to orchids. But you'll notice here, if you look at the diversity of our 100+ species in South Florida, or in Florida, about over half of those are represented by a single species, a single tropical species in these genera that just squeak up into the subtropics, that just can handle the cool nights that we used to have, and be able to survive. And so all of these are restricted to extreme southern Florida. And so this is what gives southern Florida this really unique blend and this unique diversity that's found anywhere else. Also, these species are represented in South Florida by epiphytes. So these are plants that grow on other plants. These are orchids that grow in the trees. Once you get past the frost line, which historically was below Okeechobee, now it's pushed above Okeechobee the last few years. That's south of that boundary is the only place you'll find the epiphytic orchids growing, with the exception of one or two oddballs. So South Florida is really unique in that regard, that we're very much more tropical in terms of our flora, and we're much more representative of the Caribbean than we are of mainland peninsula. And again, we have our own host of charismatic species. The largest orchid in North America, the cigar orchid, Certipodium punctatum, one I worked with for many years as my PhD. Very charismatic, very similar to that big tiger orchid you saw in Singapore. And these orchids pretty much blanketed all of South Florida before Flagler built the railroad connecting South Florida to the Northeast. And almost immediately after that happened, orchids were being poached at extreme levels, coupled with the development of South Florida, which also led after the settlers came down from the north. Pretty much all the orchids were wiped out really in a relatively short period, particularly the really old ones. And so there's a few archival photos of wagon load after wagon load of orchids. These orchids that you see here in this wagon in the center are the mule-eared orchid, one I work with in the Everglades. We're down to 40 plants left in the wild. And in this wagon's probably several hundred. So just to put it into perspective, but don't worry, we grow about 20,000 of these a year with kids. So they're secured outside of the Everglades, but in the Everglades, we're talking 40 plants left. That's how dire some of these situations are. And this occurred for nearly 100 years, even up until the late 70s and 80s. Orchids were being poached in large numbers, usually making their way to the black market. In the case of a lot of these older orchids, and this is even David Fairchild's wife in the white dress with a big armful of epidendrums. So everyone was kind of in on the action. But these orchids back in these days would make their way on the Flagler Railroad, end up in a floral shop up in the Northeast, and then end up in an aristocrat or in a Victorian mansion. It'd bloom on the dinner table and then was pitched in the garbage as a disposable flower plant. Can't replace some of these genetics. So you might ask yourself immediately, how can we grow 1 million orchids? And a lot of that has to do with the biology of the orchid, which I definitely have to introduce you to make sure you understand the program. And so these are not orchid seeds. These are the bean seeds that we're all familiar with from, you know, elementary biology, where you take home the lima bean, you put it in a moist paper towel and add a little water, make it moist, and, you know, voila, in 24 hours, you get little germinants, and these seeds have germinated. And why they can do that is because they have a built-in organ in that seed called the endosperm. That's food for that little embryo. So a typical seed, the most of that bulk, that mass, is food for that baby embryo. So we like to say their mom packed them a lunch to the little ones for their voyage. And in the case of the coconut, they got water even. It's like the perfect situation, right? Well, orchids don't have that. Their mom did not pack them a lunch. And due to that, they're the, oh, this was supposed to animate, but those are the fruit capsules. Sorry. Let me go back. Oh no, this is going to be touchy because I'm working with the mouse. So this right here is the capsules of an orchid, of the fruit, if you will. Inside each of these capsules are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tiny dust seeds. So they've sacrificed that food victual for the ability to be very small in size. So essentially, they're a naked seed type, with most of the typical orchid seeds being under 1 millimeter. So this is a 50x magnification of an orchid seed, and that little dark sphere in the center is the embryo, the little baby orchid. Hunker down and basically in a hot air balloon designed to disperse over the wind. We actually share a couple species with West Africa, even that blow all the way over the Atlantic Ocean and colonize South Florida. So they get around quite a bit. And just like the flowers, they come in all shapes and sizes and things like that. But you might ask yourself, well, how do they germinate? They have no food built in. And this is where orchids get really bizarre or really cool, depending on how you look at it. And a lot of my work was looking at how they germinate. And how they germinate is through mycorrhizal fungus. So we're talking 35,000 plus species of orchid, largest of any family. They inhabit every place on the globe except for Antarctica and the Sahara Desert. Every single one of these orchids require a fungus for the seed to germinate. So you might ask yourself, what are the chances you're a speck of dust, you're flying in the wind, you cross an ocean, that you're going to land at just the right place on the right mushroom? Exceedingly rare. So growing orchids in large numbers was never a reality. In the early 1900s, people would sprinkle these little dust seeds in pots and on coconut husk, and nothing would ever happen because the proper fungus wasn't there to germinate the seed. But when they do come in contact with the proper fungus, as you see in the picture with the mushrooms, and in the center photo, the hyphae penetrate the seed, and the orchid actually digests the fungi. It's a predator on fungus, which makes it even more bizarre. And what's really cool for all the teachers out there, and what makes orchids so wild, is that we're taught from the beginning that plants are autotrophs, right? That they create their own food via photosynthesis, they fix their own carbon, and they make their own sugar via photosynthesis. Well, really clever people that know orchids can be like, not so fast, teacher. There's actually orchids, there are actually plants, which are orchids, which are completely heterotrophic. They feed like animals. So these two first photos, there's no chlorophyll. They are completely living off of the carbon being fixed from digesting fungi. Totally bizarre. And some orchids take it to the extreme and never produce above ground parts, grow underground 100% feeding on fungi, and even bloom underground. So really bizarre. There's always exceptions in nature, and this is one of the big ones when you're talking about plant biology. But eventually, for most of these orchids, a little light will begin to, you know, the leaf litter may break apart after a rain, or in the tree, it'll get large enough to where some UV rays hit it, and it'll begin to produce the chlorophyll, as you can see in this, begin to kick out those first leaves and those first roots, and start behaving more like a typical plant, and the dependency of fungus can kind of wane off. But again, this was a huge limiting factor into the propagation of this group of plants, because growing them with the proper fungus, which we do, is a very tedious process and not practical for growing large numbers of plants. And this is kind of what they look like after they've grown a little bit, seedlings bursting out of a rotten log where they found the right fungus. Well, around the 1940s, the game changed. The advent of the nutrient agar media. So some scientists found out in around the 40s that if you supply the sugar they get from digesting fungus directly to the seed, you can germinate nearly 100% of them. And that's this black kind of layer on the bottom. This is called a nutrient agar media. And essentially, it's a cocktail of sugar, which is the main constituent, but other minimal salts and micronutrients plants need, as well as you can add cocktails of different plant growth factors and supplements to enhance growth for different types of orchids. But nevertheless, when you do the laboratory methods, you can really germinate nearly all the seeds. So you think of a capsule with 5 million seeds. That's a lot of plants you can do if you can uh, be able to achieve the sterile technique in the laboratory. So we wanted to see if we could do this with not experts, but with lay people. And we started off with a team of volunteers and this guy in the middle, Dr. Martin Moats, one of the world's premier breeders of orchids. And what Martin's good at is distilling down very technical things into things that are practical and that people understand and understand how to use. And so rather than using big pipetters, we use ladles. Rather than using fancy flask, we now use deli containers. So ways that we can really teach lay people, and now we're proud to say we can teach what was thought to be a very highly specialized field. We can teach kids as young as 12 years old and anyone in the community in about a half hour how to do this work. And to our surprise, it really worked. Pretty much overnight, our orchids, we were inundated with orchids. So a little orchid math: one fruit, maybe a million seeds, produce about 10 mother flasks of about 100,000 little plantlets. Those get bigger, they become 50 bottles, those become 250, and it's exponential. So it's not can you grow them, it's really a square footage issue. It's what the heck do you do with all these orchids? And this was our situation pretty much overnight in our lab the first 2 years. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of plants all grown in these flasks. And we were in big trouble in terms of how we're going to keep this going. This was our greenhouse pretty much within the first 2 years. An endless flood of orchids coming off, again, all managed by volunteers and the public. So that's when we had to expand our lab and we had to get the students involved. So you can see this is kind of our suite of orchids we work with. These were hand selected for orchids that we thought could perform well in urban landscapes. And we'll talk a little bit about the heat island effect and how cities are very different in terms of their microclimate compared to the adjacent natural areas. So these are all species we thought could perform well in our less than natural areas. And so immediately the program rolled out in our education department through our Fairchild Challenge program. We started with 105 schools the first year, middle school and high school, all setting them up as extensions of our laboratory. So students had everything they needed to grow the orchids in vitro in the flasks. We provided them with the flasks. And not only were they growing the orchids for their landscapes, but they also were conducting research. The entire Million Orchid Project is research-based, and the data and everything is driven by students. So at this point, we were testing out different blends. Suzanne may remember this, different blends of plant growth supplements you can put in.
Yeah, I
So like
remember
banana
that. Yeah.
powder. Yep, banana powder, potato powder, coconut water. Even though they sound good in their food products, what we're getting after are plant hormones. So for instance, banana powder is very high in auxins, which is a root hormone, a rooting hormone. Potato powder has cytokinins, which proliferate stem and leaf growth. So we were able to produce species-specific blends for each of our species that we grow in Florida, which were not published and were relatively unknown. We were kind of using a generic recipe. So through these students' data, they were able to really refine our systems. And at a certain point in the semester, they deflask their little bubble babies out of their sterile environments and they plant them in their greenhouse domes. And then they harden them off for a few months in these greenhouse domes. To put in perspective, again, what you're looking at in these domes here back in the early days were our cigar orchids, our Florida Certipodium punctatum. It's a Florida endangered species. We're talking 100 plants left in the largest population we know of, if that. And you can look at this one school. We have probably 50 plants in each of these little greenhouse domes with different treatments. We're talking 200 rare orchids in a single school. Extrapolate that over 100 schools. It's conservation at a scale we'd really never seen in terms of orchids. And all these orchids are destined for the landscapes of the schoolyards, and we plant them out each year to increase the diversity in these more or less protected areas. Schools, unfortunately, due to the circumstances, are some of the most protected areas we have in terms of enforcement and a presence of restrictedness and law enforcement presence. And each year we continue to do this, whether it's ground orchids, whether it's orchids in the trees. We get the young people involved in saving these endangered species in their landscapes, and even things like pollinating orchids. Now, this is actually one of our schools in Hialeah, which is just kind of takes everything to another level. And they were really interested in Cuban orchids, of course, being Hialeah, the largest Cuban population. So now they're specialized in growing rare Cuban orchids like this Cuban chocolate encyclia. But it wasn't enough for us. We then got a high school called Biotech at Richmond Heights. And for all the teachers out there, if you have middle school age students that are interested in plant science, they can attend our Biotech High School. which is the only magnet program catered to the plant sciences. This was in response to the state dropping plant science and botany from the curriculum. So we built a school for that. And so now it's the only one of its kind in the United States where students can actually come to Fairchild and focus in botany as a high school student. And many of these students go on to amazing things. And they have their own laboratory, even bigger than ours, where they produce tens of thousands of orchids each year and even do things like seed banking and bulking seeds for future projects and long-term conservation, understanding biology of orchid seeds. We participate with the Smithsonian as part of their banking program, and the most seeds that go to the Smithsonian are always from Miami and our public school students, which is really spectacular. Um, well, it again, we kind of build upon everything. You see, it gets pretty crazy pretty quick. And one of the things in the early days that students never got to participate in was the lab component. Obviously, none of the schools that we work with have full micropropagation or orchid labs, sterile laboratories to do the fun stuff. Students love gloving up like they're in surgery and working in the sterile environment. So we had to find a way to bring the lab to them. And this time, again, we teamed up with students, but this time it was the University of Miami undergraduates in their School of Architecture. And we joke, we gave them the least sterile thing on the planet, a decommissioned school bus. And we had them, their task was turning this into a mobile laboratory. And over the course of 3 months, they gutted this thing and actually was shocking to see them turn this thing around in such a short period of time. They don't make laminar flow hoods, sterile workspaces for buses, as you can imagine. So they had to be custom built. And over 3 months, when you get the pros, you get the form and the function. And now we have a fully functional laboratory with autoclave, DI water, solar power diesel generator. And this is what it looks like now. It gets a lot of attention nationally. And it visits 70 schools a year, middle school age schools in Miami-Dade County public schools. And they can generate nearly 30,000 plants a year just with the little 6th and 7th graders. And this comes again like our classroom model. It comes with a robust curriculum which fits all of the Sunshine State standards and whatever current standards we're on as things change. So the teachers don't have to do as much heavy lifting. They can incorporate orchid research into a lot of their teaching curriculum. And it's a lot of fun, and you can do this work. And we are always finding new ways to get the lab out to people, even these little mini hoods that we can pull up in our van and take to other places. Another thing was our Shade House project, which we also launched off again, a way that we want to get shade houses. Another part of the program is hardening them off. We're finding that these orchids usually require 6 months to a year out of flask to put on size to acclimate to the environment before they have success in the trees and into the landscapes. And so we wanted to kind of find ways to get this out, and we're looking for funding to get more of these made in the future. But again, I say every part of the conservation aspect is ran by young people in the community. Even the genetic testing of our plants has been achieved by high school students. Published our population genetics paper, which developed microsatellite primers. Now we genotype all of our orchids before we put them out in nature to understand what are the genetic makeup of the mother plants that we're collecting these seeds from. Right? If we're putting 100,000 plants out from a single seed capsule, is that mother plant inbred? Is it have diverse genetics? Is it different than another population, say in Fort Myers or West Palm? And so we really are really keen on understanding the genetics of all of our local orchids that remain and making sure we enhance those and not overwhelm them with different genetics. And again, these students tackle all types of new projects each year, which has led to numerous publications with young people, more than I can count, pardon me, from everything from propagation methods to seed banking to how to acclimate them in the wild. But more recently, kind of appropriate for this group is we've been looking at how climate effects and climate change is affecting biodiversity of plants. And one thing where the students are tasked with the last 2 years is understanding the heat island effect. And the heat island effect is the theory that particularly urban areas, urban cores tend to be hotter and drier than the adjacent natural areas and the more suburban / rural environments. So as you move away from the city, it becomes more of a stable, kind of more of what we would expect the climate to be. But inside these urban cores, it's very different. And how do plants respond to that? In particular, orchids, which are often kind of considered the canary in the coal mine of plants. They're uniquely sensitive to microclimate changes. And again, this has to do with our unique climate. The most current climate models have South Florida now completely in the tropics. We actually have 3 distinct tropical zones based on the rainfall. everything from tropical savanna in the more central South Florida parts to tropical rainforest up near Broward and West Palm, and tropical monsoon in most of urban Miami-Dade. And the rest of the peninsula, as you can see, is temperate or humid subtropical now. So we're really uniquely positioned to understand this kind of advancing warming trend that's moving up in latitude across the world. And of course, this was also reflected in our plant hardness zone map that was released 3 or 4 years ago. Pardon me if I don't know the exact date, which now places Miami in the Keys and 11 growth zone, 11A and 11B, which is crazy because I moved here in 99 and we were 9A. So this is happening. Climate change is real. It's happening now and it's human caused. And it's something that's important to you guys and important to us teaching the students, regardless of the temperature of the room in the current political climate. But this is really a great opportunity to take lemons and make lemonade and understand the effects on plants. And so as a result of that, this is also reflected in the number of days over 90, as we all know. It was rare to see 90-degree days even 20 years ago. And now we're seeing them almost every day in the summertime. And again, kind of illustrating my point that South Florida is part of the Caribbean floristic region, and we need to start thinking about things a bit different, which has now led us into thinking about Caribbean species as part of our landscapes and beautifying these areas, and potentially new migrants that will be expanding their range northward as those cold fronts no longer occur that keeps them at bay in South Florida. So we're looking at things like Guarianthe, Browtonia, which is very common in the Caribbean, Brassavola nodosa, Myrmecophila, which is like a cactus, great for urban landscapes, the hottest, driest part of your landscape. You can grow this orchid, Lealia, and beautiful things like that, which not only increase kind of the diversity, the beautification aspects, but also give us proxies to compare our native species to in terms of their responses to the warming trend. So we actually been rolling this out. I actually made a quick graph for you guys. And so we gave the students this year our Florida orchids, which are historically 9A. We gave them the historic 11A orchids from the Caribbean, and we had them compare survivorship. And sure enough, while they're collecting climate data, rain gauge data, temperature data on their classrooms or in their school yards, and sure enough, as expected in our hypothesis, the Caribbean orchids did perform better in these different warmer and drier conditions than our native orchids, which has us thinking about assisted migration, translocation, and maybe these orchids will continue to expand northward like mangrove and all these other things. I saw mangrove in Cape Canaveral recently, and it was like, wow, times are changing. So we're really thinking about how this migration, this northern expansion of these tropical plants are going to occur. And I didn't know I threw this slide in, but again, just the summary statistics. I did this more for the schools, but we put out about 1,500 orchids in this quick little study this year, and we established about 860. Most of our orchids continue to be lost to kind of most, outside of not watering them and neglecting them, iguanas, vandalism. The seniors will pull them off the tree being jerks. The facilities like to mow them down, thinking they're palm seedlings and things like that. But really, what was really remarkable from our precipitation data was that the orders of magnitude and difference in precipitation between the urban core and the adjacent western suburbs. In our downtown schools, we had an average of about 104 millimeters of rain this season during the school year, compared to about 700 in West Kendall. This is completely different. This is completely going to change the way we think about planting landscapes, water usage, and all of that can be applied from these data. And we're happy to be sharing this with the county and with the heat officers for the county to let them start thinking about how they're tackling some of these issues. But I'm happy to say the program continues to grow well beyond public schools. We are now associated with every major Miami-Dade campus. I think we're in 5 of the 6 campuses now with laboratories and/or greenhouses growing Million Orchids with their students and doing research. FAU Pine Jog has a laboratory, of course, biotech, and FIU now as well is working on the program. So we're great to see kind of the older students getting involved in the work, all leading towards this goal of 1 million. And beyond even the footprint of South Florida, for the last 6 years with my laboratory at the Smithsonian, we've had a grant to do the Million Orchid curriculum, the model for the classroom, orchids in the classroom in the Washington, D.C. area. So using our classroom curriculum, but inserting their local native orchid. And up there, they're all ground orchids. Pardon me, but we had a lot of fun with that. And, we had some really good results. Unfortunately, these orchids grow really slow compared to our tropical orchids, but they do get to put them in the refrigerator, which the students think is really cool, and pull them out in the springtime, which is a lot of fun. And again, this is kind of transferred even beyond the United States. We are now have laboratories, unfortunately, in Jamaica, which hopefully I heard this morning they're being heavily impacted. Turks and Caicos, Cayman Islands soon, Grenada soon, as well as Kerala, India, working with Kew Gardens, doing orchid rescue and using schools as refuges for rare orchids. So thinking about conservation of rare plants using the community is something that we're really keen on. So the schools are one aspect. The other aspect, obviously, is our public and private partners, which make this a reality to blanket the entire, South Florida with orchids. So I'm happy to say this is not even close to the full list, but these are some of our major participants, multi-year participants. We're happy to say every major municipality, with the exception of one or two, which soon will be on board, have contracts with us, often for many years, which is great. We're talking hundreds of thousands of orchid commitment, which helps the program generate revenue. Again, all the universities, we now have partnerships with the entire Jackson Health Complex, the entire Baptist Health Complex, all their campuses, retirement communities, homeowners associations, condo associations, org societies, cruise lines, you name it, all getting in on the fun and becoming recipients of these orchids. And we get out in the community just like we do at the schools, and do a lot of fun stuff. This guy with the Florida Gator stuff on, we will kind of ignore that, but that's actually John Lummis III. And if you may recognize the name Lummis, he got wind of the program. Well, his great-great-grandfather was responsible for basically, creating what is now Miami Beach and most of downtown Miami, basically removing the forest. And he caught wind of the program, and his foundation decided to donate money. And he loved it so much, his family actually comes down every year with his kids and helps us repatriate these orchids back into some of his namesake parks and throughout Miami-Dade County. And it's a lot of fun. And we do this all over through distributions, big community events, often sponsored by cruise lines and things like that. And we can do thousands of orchids in a few short hours with the help of the community and getting them involved. And we continue to do this over the last few years. And this is what we're seeing now all through Miami. Fully attached orchids. I think this is like downtown Doral, growing on trees. This is our urbanmost site, the design district is now blanketed in orchids. These are Encyclia tempensis, our butterfly orchid, growing in front of the Gucci of all places. And even a cowhorn up on the top, that's a cigar orchid growing in downtown Miami. You never would have thought of that, 15 years ago, ever, to see something like that. And when the first one blooms, it's going to be quite a show. And so there's another cigar orchid there growing just beautifully in downtown Miami of all places. People risk their life with alligators and mosquitoes and snakes just to see one of these in the wild. So now they can just go downtown and do some shopping and see one now. There's a mule ear orchid. It's a little beat up, but I had to take a photo of this at one of our schools. I was shocked to see the size of this specimen. It had already flowered a couple of times. Again, 40 plants of this left in the wild. So everyone counts, and particularly big ones like this that are surviving and doing quite well in schoolyards. Ground orchids at the Biltmore. And over the last 3 years, we've been seeing flowers. So, there's a lot of question marks when you do this big natural experiment. So are the pollinators in these cities? Is the urban heat island effect too much for the fungus to be present, to germinate the seeds? Well, the last few years, we've been seeing lots of flowering, particularly with our tempensis all across town. Boothiana, Prostechia boothiana, Epidendrum nocturnum's blooming. And we've been seeing pollinators too. So schools have been sending me photos of pollinator activity on their flowers. So we know the pollinators are around. If you build it, they will come. And so this was really an exciting kind of moment to see the pollinators doing their job. And we're getting fruit set now in many of our sites. So these capsules you can see over here on this photo, they're kind of hard to see a bit, but each of those have all those little dust seeds, which are going to blow miles and miles from this plant and hopefully recolonize all of the trees in the neighborhood. And so the next big question was, is the fungus present? And sure enough, 2 years ago, we found our first recruits or volunteers. And I was in the middle of US1 when I found this little bunch of plants. I was kind of acting like a maniac. But this is proof of concept that the fungus is around. I've recently had a PhD student who worked on this project, and she actually was able to sample bark of lots of host trees and roots and found out the fungus is pretty much ubiquitous, which is a big relief. So we have no doubt that if these seeds start spreading, they will begin germinating in large numbers. And we're now finding babies everywhere. So finally, kind of the last component of this program is the long-term tracking. And of course, we have to get the community involved for that. So we have an app for that now. And right now, we're actually in the beta version. So the app is not available, but it's been available previously. We're actually getting it revamped and a little bit more user-friendly. But the idea of the app is that you can download this app. It'll show you where all of the orchids are in the region. You go to one of these little pinpoints, say it's in City of Doral or Lincoln Road, and then it will direct you to a plot or a tree, which you'll then find a little QR tag like this, and you'll zap it with your phone, and you become the citizen scientist. And it asks you, is the plant alive? Is it dead? Has it been stolen? Does it have flowers? Do you see seed capsules? And so we can collect really valuable data on a large number of plants with the help of the community, and also keeps eyes on the plants as well. So since the orchid program started in 2003, we've planted nearly 700,000 is our update after this planting season, nearly 400 locations and nearly 50,000 students. Each year as the program grows, we increase our not only our breadth, but also the number of species that we're repatriating and we're becoming established. And we will continue to chug along. Hopefully in the next 2 years, we'll reach our goal of 1 million. And then it's maybe off to 1 billion as we begin to tackle other parts of the state of Florida, which are now taking on the program, and other parts of the world. So I think this is a really kind of valuable model that I think is being adopted by more and more folks around the world as they hear about it. And it all started here in Miami with the enthusiasm of our teachers, our students, and our community. So with that, I can take a few questions. For those that want to do some backyard conservation, you can shop at Fairchild. You can get a kit which contains 12 orchids. You get half terrestrial and half tree species, and you can plant these rare native orchids in your backyard and do some plant conservation, as well as purchase some of our rare Caribbean orchids, which you can establish. All these plants, as I mentioned, are resilient. So once you water them in and have them established, there's no long-term fertilizer or water needed, which is what we want to be kind of shifting to, considering the new situations with limitations. And so I'm happy to take some questions, and hopefully that was a good enough time. And I'll hand it over to you, Scott.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation. You raised a lot of important points, I think, and teachers and students could learn. I hope we will be able to circulate this recording for
Please.
more uh, input from this. But let's ask some of our visitors here if they have some questions. Why don't we come off of the stop share, or maybe everybody's got a chance to look at your slide here, and if people can either come off mute or just raise their hand, or if they've got a virtual hand. And I know we got Suzanne and Jody, who've been involved with the program. Suzanne, you got your hand up.
Um, Jason, when are you there? I'm having trouble with my Caribbean orchids that I could have a conversation with you, that I could come by, and they're not doing well for some reason.
Huh. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, let me shoot me some photos, but I'll be around the garden. I mean, tomorrow, Friday, next week, I'm pretty much around all week. I will be gone. Oh, I'll be around Monday through Wednesday next week. But
Okay.
Thursday, Friday, Monday through Wednesday. If not, I'll be back, the following week. I'm out of town for a few days, but shoot me an email.
Um, how about like Friday, mid morning, mid afternoon?
Yeah, that can work.
Okay, find you in
Yep,
the
I'll be
lab.
I'll be around the lab. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take a peek. We've also seen, I think with some of our Caribbean orchids, I think a virus hit some of them. So I'd like to see some photos. We've been noticing that some of them
Yeah,
were
I'll
virused.
take some, because I mean they were doing well, and then all of a sudden it's like they're not doing well, and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I haven't moved them, but I'm just
Yeah,
wondering.
we'll take a peek.
Okay.
Andrea had a question up. I don't know. I went to the chat room, but it disappeared. Is it someplace else? Or Andrea, you want to take yourself off mute about growing in the Tampa area? Here it is. I clicked on her screen there. She's at the Hillsborough County Public Schools, manager of
Oh, good.
the HCPS green teams for the district.
Wow.
I'm located in Tampa. Does your project have orchids that will work here? I
Yes, we
cannot
do.
unmute.
Yes, we do. So I'm glad you mentioned that. This is kind of why we do these talks. We now have received germ plat seeds essentially from the West Coast region. I talked about the importance of genetic continuity. And so, in order for us to kind of branch out into new regions, the first thing we have to do is acquire seeds that are local, maybe from whatever remnant populations you have, or if people that actually, some old timers, have some of these in their collection, because a lot of people collected orchids back in the 60s and 70s, still have them around and are happy to donate seeds to kind of, you know, feel good story for them. But we now have Encyclia tampensis from the West Coast, and what other one do we have? We have tampensis, we have Certipodium from Fort Myers, which we can do there, and Epidendrum nocturnum from that region. We will actually be working in a place called Boca Grande soon. So that's kind of our first foray, but please email us. Let's get you on the list, and we're going to basically start the program just like we did in Miami with the students growing them in the lab, in the containers, and building up the reserves to plant out in the community. So please share your contact information, and we'll give you all the details.
I know Andrea put that, she would like to speak with you more and how to bring it
Good.
to your district, to her district there. And so, yeah, you got, Andrea, you got that. Yeah, she just posted her email. I don't know, Jason, I don't know if you can see that. I'll post it in the
Let's
chat if you
see. Yeah, let me
can't.
see if I can do that really quick. I see Jody Berman, high school teacher, Broward. I don't see.
Yeah, I think
On my
it's
end,
in
I
a
don't see.
separate, maybe it just got sent to me. I'm gonna put it in the everyone thing, if that's okay with Andrea, and you'll have it there in the chat room there. You see that on the bottom now?
Not yet.
Oh, I didn't post. Sorry. Here you go. Got to click the button.
Got it.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Um, so, you just mentioned that you've had seeds from the 60s. How do you keep those alive and from the 60s and 70s, the seed
Well, they're
packets?
they're mostly the plants. The adult plants are still around, and so they can hand pollinate those to generate seed. But we do banking of seeds, and if they're kept at ultra low temperatures, we're talking thousands of years potentially for these seeds. We pull things out after 20 years at room temperature and can still germinate most of them. So they're tough seeds, and what makes them so tough is they're dry. They don't have that fleshy outer, layer that most
That's
seeds have that you would think, that helps them rot and decay. And when you freeze them, it's full of water and creates crystals. They're a dry seed type, so they're quite amenable to kind of banking. And probably why they probably bank in nature for many years until the right fungus encounters them. So yeah, they're tough seeds, believe it or not, despite their size.
You mentioned, we were talking a little bit earlier, very early about the hurricane, and you talked about wind dispersing some of this. Do you think I mean, I don't know if that's going to be a positive outcome of any of the hurricane, like the size of the hurricane that we got.
Absolutely.
It's going to push it all over the place, I'm sure. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's what we expect with all of these storms, particularly ones that approach from the south over Cuba. We find seeds after storms of Cuban species that appear kind of as one-time occurrences, but then the cold snaps hit and they die off. But without these cold snaps, I expect them to continue to migrate. They even cross in the Saharan dust. So storms are how a lot of these seeds get around in the tropics, typhoons in the old world. But yeah, absolutely, we expect a lot of orchid seeds being captured. I mean, probably millions and millions captured in these storms.
would there be any populations that you've seen in these areas that are going to get hit that wiped out in some ways, or you think they can,
Well, yeah, I mean,
maintain?
Jamaica's concerning. Actually, where the west coast, where that one is hitting, is actually population of alba, of basically a rare form of a species. Only six plants in existence. So things that are ultra rare like that, these could be, that could be it for them with these type of stochastic events. But they're natural processes. These orchids they grew, they evolved in the tropics with storms. So if the tree stays up, the orchids do not fly off the tree. That's one of the things people always ask, the city officials, like, what if we have a hurricane? Are they all going to blow? No, their roots are designed to hold firm. If the tree maintains, then the orchid will be just fine in most cases.
Fantastic. Do we have some more questions or I didn't, there was something in the chat. I didn't know if I caught it there, but any more questions from our audience here? Yeah, I'm happy to. What are you really talked nicely about kind of the different projects that the students are doing. Did you run any, are there any particular barriers for schools for doing some of this work that you might share?
That's a great question. And a lot of the barriers we find it has nothing to do with like, because again, we provide all of the resources, all the materials, free of cost to the school. So there's no real, limitations in terms of, what the money issue in terms of providing the schools with what they need. The real barriers tend to be things like long breaks, so
Hmm.
Christmas break, spring
Right.
break, and then the summer. Having a good plan, particularly with the maintenance and facilities crews, to recognize these plants in the landscapes, particularly for the ground orchids, which do look similar to like palm volunteers. So, a lot of these landscape guys are trained to pull up what they think are little palm seedlings, and so I think there's a little bit of kind of education that's needed to be done, and making sure they're well marked or they're in a safe place where they're going to be protected over the summer. Um, Really, the other limitation, the only time we really see kind of dramatic losses is really just a lack of watering in. So, like any orchid or any plant, when you establish it, you have to water it in for the first couple weeks to establish it, just like anything you plant in the ground. So when we have these prolonged dry spells, it's really tough for these orchids. And due to the nature of the school year, we start kind of at the beginning of the dry season. So it's really critical that they get established as quick as possible before we enter into like November and December, where we get really dry. But also this year, in terms of like the climate impacts, we had an historic drought. I don't know if many of you guys know that. You guys are climate people, but we had a 50-year drought this year. A lot of people don't know that because kind of we had a deluge here recently. But we went at Fairchild 239 days with an inch of rain or less. That's a desert. So that was something that was unexpected. And we did see losses. I even saw losses in the natural area in Everglades. Plants that were 67 years old
Hmm.
died from drought, including bromeliads. So these are also things we're looking at and trying to understand that and how we can ameliorate those. But really, the main constraints again are kind of these long-term like spring breaks and things like that. Who's going to attend to the orchids if they turn the air conditioner off in the school and they're in flasks? Will they melt? Those type of things. And then also the weed whacker guys in the summer. Iguanas also, of course, in South Florida.
Iguanas, yeah,
Yeah, they could be
you get
devastating.
everything. Okay. Let's see, is there any, oh, I'm seeing something here. Um, Joe, you put your email in there
I
and
got it. I
okay,
got
so
that,
that
and I can
was
send you the information.
for
And
Jason
we
as
do
well.
have a
Okay.
Broward liaison. Broward Native Orchids. Jim Ackerman was a dear friend. He started Broward Native Orchids, which became kind of our Broward liaison. But we've been working with the Broward area, not as much as Miami, but we're happy to roll out more Broward schools. We really have to get the footprint in Broward a little bit more in depth, a little bit more robust. And we will be doing a couple parks with the city here soon in downtown Fort
Oh,
Lauderdale.
um, yeah, I guess I mean, yeah, you mentioned the app where these was going
Yeah,
to track where everything is. I mean, is that sort of the way to organize all of this, or does somebody, are you the person there that organizes where all these things are? Then you got them in your in a database or something like
yeah.
that. Okay.
Absolutely. So we keep a database, kind of a running, sheet of where the locations are, the species that were planted there, the number of species. The app is a subset of species that we put in certain locations. So obviously we can't mark all 700,000. It's a subset of the orchids in different regions. The app had been running for about 8 or 9 years, but this year it finally was non-compatible with the new. I'm not an app person, but these things get like outdated with the iOS system or Android as they kind of develop these new phone gadgets. So we're actually working with some professional designers now to get that back online. But it's a great way to get the community involved in seeing where the orchids are in their community. And the latest kind of map I looked at that will be on the new app. I think we found that with our coverage, it's in Miami-Dade County in particular, you're no more than a 30-minute walk or a 5-minute drive from an orchid now.
Oh,
There were
wow.
zero
That's
when we
cool.
started the program.
Yeah, that's really great.
It is.
Um, so you mentioned some, both ways for groups and schools to contact you and get involved with the project, and also individuals if they want to
Yep.
purchase, from Fairchild itself. Do the individuals have a chance to be part of the database when they do this?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely. If they
fantastic.
want to be, we can actually we can add their we don't put a dot like right on your house, of course.
Right.
We will typically we put the way markers, the waypoints in public spaces, parks, city trees, things like that. But yeah, you absolutely can definitely be added to our coverage map.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, thank you. We're just
My
about
pleasure.
closing off, and I
Yep,
do want to show our flyer for our next month. I want to thank you so much. There's so much rich information in what you
my
presented,
pleasure.
and fantastic opportunities. Jody, do you want to comment about it? I know you were involved in the early part of the
Oh,
program.
our school it wasn't me, it was Pam Kraus. I taught a different grade, but yeah, if there's
Oh
a
yeah.
way to come back and into the fold, we're definitely interested.
Good. Yeah, Pam's gone, I think now, right? But
Oh yeah, for a while.
yeah, for a while. So yeah, so we just need a lead teacher. We got to have you guys back on. You guys are It's amazing up there what you guys got going on up there.
Fantastic. I'm just going to quickly show this slide so it gets to be part of the presentation recording. This is our next month, just in time for Thanksgiving, just a couple days before that. We're having Cornell Professor Emeritus talk a little bit about food and how that's a way to talk to students and community members about what's happening with the climate and how that impacts what we eat and that sort of thing. So
Wow.
I'm sure that'll be a fun event. So once again, Jason, thank you so much for this. This has been
My pleasure.
terrific, and we appreciate your doing, and hopefully we'll have this recording up in the next few days, and we can spread the word some more. Like
Appreciate it.
the seeds from the orchids, I guess, huh?
You got
All
it.
right. All right. Thank you all, and thanks again for everything.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.